Theodore Roosevelt once said, "The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena."
I believe there's a hero in all of us.
So that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat.
Seize the day.
Whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood. Who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, and spends himself in a worthy cause.
And I'm going to stay right here and fight for this lost cause.
Who at best, if he wins, knows the thrills of high achievement. And if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly.
I'm going to show you how great I am.
The radio station that dominated rock music through much of the 60s and 70s stopped the music today and started a new format of news and talk. The change at WABC is part of a much wider readjustment of programming choices on AM and FM radio.
Since 1960, since the days of the Silver Dollar Survey through the height of the Top 40 format, WABC Radio had been a rock and roll giant. Ron Lundy and Dan Ingram have a total of 38 years in front of the microphone. Today, they counted down the final minutes of their final show together.
Well, so be it. It's all over.
Their thoughts were their own at that moment. The two veteran disc jockeys brought a radio era to life, and they put it to rest. AM radio is being forced to change because of its younger brother, FM.
What station were you listening to?
101 FM.
FM. Do you listen to FM a lot?
Quite a bit of the time, yeah. Unless I'm on news or traffic reports, then I'm on AM.
So you turn to AM for information?
Right.
There is only one Top 40 station left on the AM band in New York.
WNBC. Coming up.
Radio insiders analyze WNBC's unique position as precarious. And NBC program officials are planning stereo broadcasts late this summer in order to compete with the better sound quality of FM. They're forced to innovate to survive.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, New York, to Talk Radio 77.
WABC started its all-talk format after a new newscast today. The old sound is gone, and so are some of the old voices.
I don't think that it'll ever be another radio station that will come close to being as big as we were.
There are so many people of a certain generation who believe that the day the music died was the day that a plane crash occurred, and it took the Big Bopper, Ritchie Valens, and, of course, Buddy Holly to their deaths. That was, of course, the day the music died for some. But for me and so many others in a certain generation, May 5th of 1982, that was the day the music died. That was the day that WABC stopped playing music. And I was a kid. I grew up with WABC. That was the station to listen to every single day. And when the music stopped there, we didn't know where the hell to go. But little did we know that that was simply the beginning of a trend, because at that time the music was dying. Certainly on AM. It moved to FM. Now it's even dying on FM. And this is one of those great conversations that I've had so many times with friends of mine. What happened to radio? Who killed radio? Who killed what is AM radio, what is now FM radio? And will we ever get back to where we were? I don't think so. But it's a great conversation to have, because you need to have it not with the consulting experts, but rather have it with the people who have lived radio and the people who have been there. And I'm happy to finally get a chance to talk about that with some of the, and one of the individuals here that you see said, please don't call me a legend. Okay, well, maybe we'll call everybody veterans, because maybe that's even better. So let me introduce the people that I've had the opportunity to bring along today. First of all, let me introduce, he started as a radio guy when he was 14 years old, hosted shows in Miami, Las Vegas, Seattle, Los Angeles. Was an actor in Miami, film, stage, television, heard on NBC Sports Radio. And it's always nice to know that he's got the bed handy just in case, so that if we really bore him, he can go ahead and take a nap. I listened to this guy in Miami for years, and he certainly is. I don't care what he says. He certainly is a legend as far as I'm concerned. Dave Caprita. Dave, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for being part of something that I hope I can contribute to with my limited knowledge. Yeah.
No, that's all right. Corey said you could, so if you can't, you're in big trouble. He has been around in this business, like we all have, for a very long time. And if you'll recognize the last name, his father was Dan Ingram, who you heard there and you heard mentioned on that report for WABC, and the guy that I simply listen to all the time. So he has got to have a tremendous amount of stories, certainly at least from his book, which we won't let him get away from talking about a little bit later on. It's a pleasure to welcome Chris Ingram to the show today. Chris, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Ed. It's a pleasure to be here. Among the real legends, I don't know what I'm doing here. I must have taken the wrong turn.
And finally, let me introduce a great friend of mine. We have known each other, I don't know, since I think the 1800s, although I believe he was there when Marconi started, and maybe I was there as well, because we've all been around.
When he laid the cable.
He is one of the greatest creative voices that I have ever heard, and so many others have heard. He has done so many radio commercials. He has been a producer, an engineer. He's been a marvelous actor on films like Analyze This, The Truman Show. He has been on theater. He's been on Burn Notice in television. He has been a driving force with SAG-AFTRA, with the union, and protecting a lot of the performers that need it every single day from the unscrupulous side of this business. And boy, I'll tell you, there's stories right in there. We welcome Dave Corey to the show. Mr. Corey, a pleasure, sir. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Ed. It's really, this is going to be fun. Can't wait to ride it.
Let's hope so, because we have so much material to work from. So I'm going to start out, first of all, with everybody here, because we've all been in the business for a tremendous amount of time. And we have all seen the changes, and we have all watched as corporates have changed, and playlists have changed, and public mores have changed, society has changed, music tastes have changed. Shortly, if you will, Dave Corey, let me get back to you first of all. Give us all a little bit on how you got started and some of the things that you've seen recently in radio.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really quite interesting. The genesis of my particular career is it's funny where fate takes you. As a kid, we moved a lot, and it wasn't just from one part of New Jersey to another part of New Jersey. It was usually coast to coast. I was born in San Jose, California. Before I was 3 years old, we moved to Pennsylvania. Then we're back to California. Then we're to New Jersey. And it was through my whole life, right up through high school, that every 2, 3, 4 years we were going to move. And what I discovered after a while is I didn't want to make friends because I would have to say goodbye to them. I knew that would be my fate. So I said to my folks, if you want to get me something for Christmas, get me a full-length mirror in the house, and get me a tape recorder so I can make stupid faces in the mirror, and I can do stupid stuff with the tape recorder. So I had reels and reels of burps, reels and reels of farts that I would do. And so those were my formative years. But I spent a lot of time in New Jersey, too, listening to the likes of Dan Ingram and Gene Shepard. And occasionally I'd be able to, on my rocket radio, pick up Cousin Brucey and some of those guys. And yeah, I really aspired to that. And when I got to the University of New Hampshire, they had a terrific radio station there. And learned from the ground up. We basically had an advisor, and he said, here's the beautiful facilities. You guys just go nuts. And that was how it began. And it took me to Armed Forces Radio, and then it took me to Manchester, New Hampshire. Concord, New Hampshire was my first station, where we played every record that was sent to us. You get the shipload of 45s, and every single record was played. Kites Are Fun and all that kind of crap. And I did a swap shop and exercised some improv on that, much to the chagrin of the conservative general manager. Became eventually program director at WFEA in Manchester, New Hampshire, a rock station, and for the first time in the history of RKO, some little station in Manchester was actually beating them in our market. So I think they wanted to see me out of town. So I applied there. There was an opening. I think Dale Dorman was leaving or something like that. And they said, sorry, we're hiring from within. But we got a station down in Miami that's looking for a production guy. So why don't you go down there? And that was Waxy with Rick Shaw. And that's where I did production. And then I became Dr. Dave in the mornings. And then I got bounced around. And I don't know. I somehow got here through without ever leaving Miami. You know, I wasn't as itinerant as some of my brothers and sisters.
Well, I think that's all happened.
That's basically
we've all bounced around. I mean, that's the one thing that we can say about all of us, because people start to look at our resumes, and one of the first things that someone said to me, "Can't you hold a job?" I said, we're working radio and TV sometimes because that's all we do. I mean, we continue to move around constantly. Dave Caprita is back, and he joins us. Dave, it's nice to see you back once again, because as a matter of fact, I'm going to go to you now, right, Dave? Because I want you to give us a little idea how you got started in this insane business, and if you were dragged willingly. Sometimes I believe that maybe we need to be dragged by our heels sometimes to be in this business when everything begins.
Oh, it was definitely willingly. My brother, who was 8 years older than me, at the ripe age of 18, he became the manager of a little radio station in Pensacola, Florida. And I was like literally 13 years old, the summer of '67. And despite the protestations of his boss and all the other DJs, he gave me a shift. So the first time I was on the radio, and I eagerly jumped for it, but it was one of those things where I was like such a shy kid that I could hardly speak out when somebody said hello to me. So everybody thought it was really weird that this diffident kid who was so shy that he couldn't speak wanted to be a DJ. But I jumped into it with both feet, destroyed myself on my first show. But once I got the taste of it, as I got into college and then left college, I actually was a few months away from graduating to get my music degree, and I quit because I wanted to be a DJ. So I would say I didn't get drafted. I pretty much threw myself into it, for better or worse.
Yeah.
And
did you ever use the word Did you ever use the word diffident on the air? Just curious.
Only with you. I think it was the summer of 1979 was the first time I ever used the word diffident on the radio.
Yeah, we have to all say this, that in many of our careers, using the word diffident on the air, you would have at least 100% of the listeners go, "What'd he say? Did he just curse?"
Either that, you would either have the listeners saying that, or you would definitely have a consultant after the show. Don't use words like that, because the listeners are too stupid. And that's, I'm sure we'll get into that later. Yes. But I think, since the theme is what the hell happened to radio, I think, and I mean, even consultants who still to this day hate my guts because I used to throw the crap back at them when they would give me ridiculous advice, things like that. I was totally cured of consultants when I started working with Neil Rogers, because he completely threw the Bible out the window. And ever since then, I never did look back. I probably still have enemies to this day in the consultant world, because I never showed them any respect, which was probably a bad thing.
Well, but
because they were
have to
trying
admit
to
something,
do their
though,
job.
and we will talk about consultants, but consultants didn't earn any respect from the people who were on the air, because we were nothing more than their play toys to basically throw in the mud and squish with their heels. But we'll get into them momentarily. Chris, as the son of a legend in New York, was it set in stone that you would get involved somehow in this business, whether it's television, radio, anything whatsoever? Or were you the combative kid that said, no, please don't make me get in front of the microphone, Dad. I don't want to have to do this for a living.
Well, I'll tell you, I was born a radio vagabond. We were born wherever he would, put down roots for a year. We had a few kids up in New York on Long Island. I think we had my brother Dan in Dallas. My twin brother and I were born in St. Louis. So we, I grew up with a blended family of 8 kids. And out of those 8, you figure somebody had to be stupid enough to follow him into the business. And I was always fascinated by it. I mean, he had this big old studio at home, and my dad would, and I'd kind of peek around the corner and watch him doing his work. And he taught me to edit tape on his knee when I was about, 8 or 9. Put the cans in my head and ran the music through an echo chamber, which was the same one they had at WABC. And that was the first time I ever felt drunk. I was like, wow. And I was absolutely just, I don't know if I was born to it, but I was absolutely amazed by the business. I used to go in and watch him do the show. He put me on the air once. Hi, my name's Chris Ingram. Doing the Dan Ingram show today. Some silly stuff like that. Wow. So for me, it was sort of a thing. The one thing I did do, I got into news. I wasn't going to be copying my father, so I got into news. Worked in Boston News Radio.
Why not? But wait a minute. But why not? I mean, your dad was such a glib entertainer. What was it that said to you, okay, the difference is I've got to be the news guy instead?
Well, Dad always also said something else. He always said, the next anybody is nobody. And I didn't want to get into the business trying to be the next my father. And I also was stupid enough to think I shouldn't try to ride his coattails or use his name. So it took a while to get a job. But I actually walked in and got a job at a news radio station as an intern and was an executive editor within 2 weeks, even though I didn't have a college degree or certainly any journalism background. And I just clawed my way up from there to CBS News in New York. Then decided to be a DJ because I said, you know what, I do want to be a jock. And so I got a job in, I was in the Catskills at WVOS FM where I took over mornings, and the station went from dog last to #1 in the market, just by doing, not being the next Dan Ingram, but having that kind of a sense that sort of anything goes. And luckily I had a GM who was, okay with that because the numbers were good, and she could sell the station for a change. And that's what we're lacking now. We're lacking owners and management who has faith, any kind of faith in the talent these days.
See,
and that's it's one of those things that are just crushing us.
I think you nailed that right off the top here, because there is an inherent talent that used to be involved in radio, where the first time someone would sit down in front of that control panel, you had an idea where you were going. You had an imagination. You were pushed to have that imagination. I remember the very first place I went, and my first job didn't last long at all because, as I said to Chris off the air, I wanted to be the next Dan Ingram. I really did. I emulated him, but unfortunately, the radio station I worked for was owned by a Christian broadcasting company and a Christian family, and they wanted to do top 40. So here I am doing 6 to 10 in the morning. I'm doing top 40. And I swear to you that 20 minutes into my first shift, the owner comes in and says, "We don't do that stuff here, boy." And I said, "What? This is fun. This is rock and roll. I mean, that's what this is supposed to be." But you had people who didn't have a tremendous amount of experience. They had faith from the management there, and I think management wanted to groom them and wanted us to be good. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but there was a time, magically, when management was behind us.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if you had numbers or if you showed that you were entertaining your audience and you would listen to a little bit of direction, not a whole, but not the kind of stuff you're seeing today, they were happy to mentor you or let you find a mentor and let you grow. And that would find, now these days, guys my age are doing weekends. Well, where are the teenagers doing weekends that we grew up seeing when we were kids? We were teenagers working, learning the craft. And now it's because of what's going on in the industry, it's us scraping for anything I can get, being grateful for a weekend gig at $15 an hour.
Mm.
Now,
that's such a sad state
a word
of
in there,
affairs.
and I want to go to Dave Corey on this one, because Dave, you have been in so many different places between theater and film and TV and production and so many things you've done. The word is craft. And I think what we're missing here in radio, certainly terrestrial radio, and that's what we're going to focus on here today, is terrestrial radio. Because satellite radio is the playing of music and the rebroadcast of syndicated shows, and is not really, and again, I'm going to take a lot of heat for this from friends, but I don't consider it a craft when you're playing pre-programmed music that comes in packets, and you're hitting the computer and it's button clicking. And yeah, you have Nina Blackwood and some of the old VJs that are in there. but all they're doing is spitting out liner notes. It's not a craft. Is it not fair to say, Dave, that what we're talking about here is a craft that has completely disappeared?
I couldn't agree with you more in that regard. So many of us came along as basically artistic individuals that were looking for a place to exercise our craft. We had pretty facile brains there that would be able to. And one of the people I really credit for this in this market is Kimba. She was a perfect example of having a joke or a story in the news, and somebody would go for the obvious punchline. But then there were those of us, and this is where I credit Kimba so much too, is that she would just push that obvious punchline aside and just mine for gold, to go deeper, deeper, and deeper to the point where people would hear it and they go, and then all of a sudden they go, oh my God, that's brilliant, you know? And so I think that's where a lot of us came from. You know, the joke that I was talking to Dave Caprita about there at Waxy, I think it was actually my demise was, I had recently come from New Hampshire and was doing a morning show, and that was the day Flipper died. And I didn't realize what an institution Flipper was in the area, you know. So the next day I did a little bit where I had wave noises in the background, and I had little dolphin noises, you know, that kind of thing going on. And so then I got very low and I said, ladies and gentlemen, we now take you to Key Biscayne for the last rites for Flipper. And I see the dolphins are now lining up for a 21 blowhole salute. And at that point, I had a cacophony of fart noises that just, you know, and I was called into the office after that. But still, the kind of stuff. I remember up in New Hampshire in the early 70s, it was a French-Canadian, Manchester was French-Canadian, and there was this big story of how one of the television stations was going to take programs that were broadcast in English and translate them into French, and so they'd be broadcasting them in French. So I did a takeoff on Marcus Welby, MD, at the time, and the whole thing was called L'Enema avec le clean air de vacuum. So you can imagine that.
That's imaginative.
Those were
that's creative. That's a joke. That's having fun with an audience.
And I would have program directors, and I was there myself, where I told the management, I said, you take care of the bucks and you take care of the salespeople. I literally, when I became program director, I drew a line on the between the studios and between the offices, and I said, if you cannot cross this line. You cannot call talent on the air and bother them like, what the hell is that record? And, you know, all the bullshit you do. And I said, if you got money for a promotion, throw it over that line and I'll take care of it. Don't tell me what to do with it. And sure enough, I was doing the morning show and at the PD at the same time. And the GM called up and asked me what the hell that record was I was playing. I said, well, at that time, it was a 45. I said, it's the last one you're going to hear from me today. I hope you got somebody to take over for me, because I let it run out, walked out of the studio, went up to Dirty Earl's up the street, had some fried clams, and you know, and I think they got the message. And that's the kind of program director I've had the honor working with, the Rob Sidneys of the world, probably one of the best program directors. Rick Shaw, he incorporated into my brain, and you know, when I would do bits, he says, don't forget, you know, we're 100,000 watts or whatever there was, music. So if you got something to do, make it short, make it 30 seconds tops. It has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Boom. And I said, don't worry, man, that's my fort. Until I did the blowhole salute. So
don't worry, you made the blowhole work. It was perfect. I'm Ed Berliner, and this is The Man in the Arena. I'm with Dave Corey, Dave Caprita, and also with Chris Ingram as we discuss the state of radio, amongst other things. So then, Dave Caprita, where did we lose the entertainment side of things here? Because Chris's dad was very much an entertainer. Dave Corey's talking about being an entertainer. You certainly were on your time where you had fun with it. When I did jock and then also did sports talk for a lot of years, even when I was doing news, I would drop in a lot of double entendres, have some fun with it. When did we lose that, and why did we lose that?
Well, once again, and you're probably going to want to say this for later in the show, I think just corporate America. People don't trust creativity. I mean, you find it in some radio stations still to this day that have the balls to allow people to do what they want. But I think as the years went by and people trying to make money that to cover their butts, you see radio stations spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, putting people in a small room and playing like 10-second snippets of a piece of a song. And like, do you like that or do you not like that? You know, which is one of the most ludicrous ways to find out what it's like, showing Mona Lisas and Monets and everything, and like a flash for 1 second on the screen going, did you like that? And so you had that, and then you had consultants telling people what to do instead of hiring people on their own merits. And when people hired me, whether it was Rick Shaw at Waxy or Rick Peters at Love 94, or when I moved out to the West Coast, I tried to let them know what they were getting, that I was not going to be obscene or obnoxious to the best of my ability, but I was going to be me. And me is kind of like a wearing your heart and your personal life on your sleeve. I mean, some of the best comments I ever got from listeners was like, what you said about your cat magic, or what your wife did to you the other day. I mean, the listeners loved that. But consultants always felt like, don't make it about yourself. Don't try to be too funny. And it was just so for me personally.
Which is the key to relating to someone, is being personal and letting someone in. That's what we do in shows like this in many ways, and that's what people want to do. And I think
go
to
ahead.
Consultants. Go right there. Let's go there, because we may as well, because between consultants and management and ownership, we've got some depth and breadth to discuss here, because the consultants who were brought in to discuss radio had no experience on the air, had never programmed a radio station in their life, were mostly salespeople, were people who just sat there and watched trends and looked at ratings. Chris, I got to tell you, when your dad was sitting there spinning records and going off on great tangents on WABC, I can't imagine for 1 minute that anybody came in and said, you know, Dan, you shouldn't talk about a record like that, and don't make heavy breathing noises when Barry White comes on. Which he did, and which still lives with me as one of the great moments. I can't believe anybody came in and said, stop doing it.
The closest was the Castro convertible commercials, where he said, we now have Ottomans that turn into entire empires and stuff like that. And Dad lived these live breeds. And, I think it was Rick Sklar said, hey, you got to knock this off. But then Castro called and said, I love what you're doing. Keep doing it. So that qualified. But I mean, the things with these consultants is they are afraid to hear anything they didn't expect. They think they have to know what's going to happen on the air before it happens, because they're so afraid. They have such little faith in us as performers that it scares them to death that we might say something that they didn't expect, and then they gotta somehow deal with the mess. And yeah, sometimes people do go out off the reservation. Okay, but for the most part, if you want a really thriving community of radio, you got to have people willing to take chances, willing to be themselves, as you said, Dave, and just being willing and open to letting themselves out there and knowing the line. And you get that with consultants.
That's such a good point about the commercials. I just, in my brain, I can remember two from Boston. Jess Kane used to do on BZ, I believe it was. He used to do commercials for Kane Relish. And he got on the air one day and he says, Kane's, you're relish shit. Like that. And then Dale Dorman used to do Mrs. Paul's fish sticks. And he goes, Mrs. Paul's fish sticks, they're quick and easy, just like Mrs. Paul herself. And I bought the Cane's Relish. I bought the Mrs. Paul's fish sticks, and meantime, I can just picture the management coming down. How dare you say that on our, Yeah. And the definition of a consultant, by the way, I'm sure you've heard it before. It's a shit salesman with a mouthful of samples.
Perfectly well put. Now that we've gone ahead and got after the consultants, but then again, as I noted in the early stages of this show, they deserve it, quite frankly. I mean, there are consultants out there who are good at their job, but in the time that we're talking about, the consultants didn't care. They spit all over. They treated the talent as if the talent was nothing more than roaches on the bottom of their shoe. And they treated us as if we didn't know anything at all about what we were doing. Yet we were the ones who had the direct connection with the fans at all times. We were the ones answering the phones. I was the guy on the sports talk shows and on the news talk shows, sports talk a lot in my early stages, who was sitting there talking to people. Dave and Chris and all of us, we're the ones who answered the phones and got on the air with these people. We knew what was coming back, and we could make sense of it, and then we could entertain. And I don't want to go any farther without at least taking a couple of moments here to, having discussed what Dan Ingram did on the air, to at least have a couple of moments, and this, I'll be honest, this is a personal moment for me because I absolutely worship the man and what he did and listen to Dan Ingram every single day on 77 WABC in New York.
WABC's Dan Ingram Show. So there's this old guy every once in a while. I found out that evidently he was a policeman who retired. And he gets out and he starts directing traffic, usually on 54th Street, 53rd Street, 6th, 7th Avenue, around there. Really, I mean, I want to tell you, they got to put that guy back in uniform. He may be a little cuckoo, but he gets the traffic moving all right. He got him rolling. It was some truck, I love trucks that come across the street, all the jockeying back and forth. They can't go anywhere, and the guys are blowing their horns. He walks up and says, "Move that vehicle!" Guys, yes, sir. Right out of the way. Way they went. Traffic opened up. Was fantastic. WABC. Major Harris. You did? How did you make it? Listen, encore. Love won't let me wait. He's here with a lady with a heavy breathing and all that stuff, fogging up my control room window. 6 minutes past 2 on ABC and the Angry Bass. How you doing, Kimasabi? WABC. Thank you, my dear. She said it before I asked the question, but the question was 5 hours ago to Jacqueline Maher. I wonder if that's relation to John Maher. No, he spells his name meager and pronounces it Maher. This is Jacqueline Maher, spelled Maher. Anyway, she said, we're at WABC, we say what station you listen to, and that answer is going to keep on earning her. Are you ready for this? She is going to, would you answer it again, dear? Just tell me, what is your radio station, my dear? That's very good. That answer is going to keep getting her that 6% on $1 million computed hourly until we find another WABC down piano. WABC, listen, say it. When I say roll it under, I mean under, not over. I just had a piano rolled over me. It was fun. Anyway, we find another WABC listener. Our daily secrets of 14 random calls. We have a lot of reading to do here. Increase your chances of being called by mailing your name, address, and phone number to Winter Box 77, New York 10019, or hang around in the right bars and meet the PD, and, you may get a better chance. And so we leave another program of young Beethoven. When we last left little Ludwig, he was trying to finish his fifth. He has now finished it and is lying in a stupor on the floor. We'll check it out again tomorrow, gang, on Young Beethoven, starring Barry Manilow in the title role. WABC.
Oh, my God.
It's classic. It's fun. I mean, the stuff that he said. But here's the thing. And first of all, and Chris knows this. I mean, one of his great lines was, "How you doing, Kemosabe?" You would not be able to use that word on the air today. You couldn't get away with it. I really don't think somebody would get in a snit about using it. The Major Harris line was a great bit where he just used it. The bit about Barry Manilow, there's no fun anymore, damn it, on radio. And, okay, so then let's get to this. AM radio. What killed AM radio? Was it the fact that consultants didn't want any more fun and they wanted everybody to act like the same deadhead on the air? Was it management who wanted to pay as little as humanly possible and didn't really give a damn about having anything creative? Was it sales who wanted you to knuckle under and pay attention? Was it the fact that there were music playlists that weren't imaginative at all? What killed AM, or even the signal itself? Because let's go to that. There are people, and we heard it at the beginning of the show, people who said, I listen to FM. People still say, well, I went away from AM radio because it was too scratchy, I couldn't hear it, and it was way off in the distance, and FM, I got this beautiful sound. Okay, first of all, let's go to Chris Ingram. I throw it to you. What killed AM radio?
Oh, I think, frankly, the most important part is the fact of the audio quality. The music just sounds better on FM. AM these days, it's got to make a living doing something other than music, for sure. And that transition, especially in New York, with KTU, KTU going the disco route. That's when people started seeming to really care about the audio, maybe. But to me, that's primarily it. All the things you said were certainly contributing factors, but I think it simply comes down to the matter of the quality of music over FM versus AM.
Okay, Dave Capriti, you're up next. AM radio, and you spent most of your time in FM radio on Love 94 in Miami. And we can get to that because certainly things have changed there. But in your opinion, what killed AM radio?
Well, I'm going to be a little bit of the devil's advocate because I totally agree with Chris. It was definitely the quality, because you're talking about the late 60s. Technology was changing. Music was drastically changing, and people wanted to hear it. Not just quality-wise, but I think in a different genre. So you had like radio stations cropping up in San Francisco and New York that were playing Jefferson Airplane and Jimi Hendrix and everything, and it just sounded so trippy, fantastic on FM instead of AM. So I think that's basically what was the death knell, was starting in the late 60s and early 70s. But having said that, I must say that I have the double album of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and one of my favorite parts of that vinyl and the movie is when KHJ comes up with that heavy compression, and it's like that driving music as they're going down the highway, and it's like you can't get that kind of compressed ass-kicking sound like you did back in those days with AM radio,
All right, we got to get you a little more center camera there, Big Boy. We don't want to lose you because we keep losing you because you're drifting. It's not quite cocktail hour yet, so you got to take it easy, okay? We don't want to lose you. We can lose you early. It's not a problem. All of a sudden, I feel like Ingram all of a sudden. Quick, stop Dave. He's over in the corner, heavy breathing. Dave Corey, then. Most of your time, of course, spent on FM in Miami. But what killed AM radio?
I'm going to have to make it unanimous. But I think it caved, and it found after it died and succumbed to FM radio, they found the easy way out. They didn't get innovative. They didn't say how can we go up against that with something other than sports and right wing talk. So they dropped the ball there. This probably would never have happened, but one of the great memories of my life was when I lived again in New Jersey, and I was a little kid, and this defines my age here, but we would sit in our Hudson Hornet on the way back from Atlantic City or something like that, and they'd be playing.
Hornet? Is that a car?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, and they'd be. Yeah, it was something else. Big hunky car, about like 5,000 pounds, and it would. Gunsmoke would be playing on the radio. I used to listen to that. They'd be playing that on AM radio. So that was even before they were doing that. Before Stan Freed or what's his name, the rock and roll. Freed.
Alan
Freed.
Alan Freed.
Alan Freed. So I mean, they were
doing
that
old
kind
yet,
of.
Dave. Come on, you still have your capacity. Everything's fine.
I know, but that was one of the things that I said, why couldn't they go back to, the real creative stuff, of maybe doing little, have a team of writers and put on that kind of stuff in addition to the crap that they were putting on the air. To me, it succumbed. I think the biggest problem now is what the hell happened to FM radio. And I know you're probably going to, segue into that. That is a more disgusting turn of events, I think, than what happened to AM radio. AM radio was just it was a genesis. It was evolution.
Okay,
as far as I can see. But
that's fair.
What's going on? Yeah.
Let me jump on something here before we go into FM radio, because you talked about writers and you talk about scripting. Now, Dave Corey and Dave Caprita, we both were here in the era of Neil Rogers, who was the last great daytime talk show host anywhere, local talk show host in America when it came down to entertainment. Chris, I don't know how much you had a chance to listen to Neil or catch him from Tampa, but I know that he was syndicated for a time in Tampa. But
well, I was in Lauderdale, not Tampa, so I would know.
Okay, yeah, Neil was brilliant. He had people who worked with him and for him, and they had bits that were created for him. They had 10-second bits, 20-second, 30-second, 60-second commercials. They had things they took off the air. They had drops from callers, such as the bridge tender, which will always go down as one of the single greatest bits of all time. But it was imaginative, it was creative. He would throw to them, he would drop in the phone callers, but he wasn't afraid to use additional material. And that was AM, everybody. That he was FM and AM, but he made his bones and made a tremendous amount of money. He was the last $1 million player that I can remember in AM radio, last $1 million host. So if we're looking to save AM radio, and again, maybe I'm just throwing it out here, and it's not worth saving. But right now, AM radio is this mindless, droning cacophony of syndicated talk shows that say the same thing over and over again, usually bad sports talk radio, bad right-wing talk radio. It's all the same thing. There's nothing local that grabs anybody. If we were, and if there was, despite the fact the sound sucks, I'll give you that. But if somebody were to come up with something creative and put it together and think about it and make it fun and make people laugh, could we save a little AM radio maybe, or are we too far gone?
I got 2 words.
Go ahead.
Yeah, 2 words for you. Those 2 words are Phil Hendry. He is, I get his podcasts and I will listen to them 5, 6, 10 times, the same ones over and over. The man is brilliant, and you know, it drives my wife crazy because I'm in the kitchen cooking or whatever, and I got Phil Hendry blasting. That's the kind of stuff. I don't know if you're going to find talent like him anywhere.
And he was in Miami for a time. He was also in Miami.
Yes, he was. Yeah.
I worked with him. I'm sorry. I was just going to say I worked with Phil at Premier Radio in Los Angeles for a while, and because I had access to all his shows, this is statute of limitations. I would actually, and being in radio since I was a little kid, it was very unusual for me to record other people's shows. But I used to burn his funniest shows on CD and send them to my daughter because she lived somewhere where she couldn't hear him, and she loved, to this day, she loves those CDs. But I used to dub Phil Hendry's shows and send them to her in the mail all the time.
Okay, so but if people who haven't heard about Phil, what is it about Phil Hendry that attracts anybody to listen to him? And could what Phil does now? You said podcast, and of course podcasts now rule the day in radio. Could what he does transfer back to terrestrial radio, or is it just not worth the effort?
Well, you're not finding that talent. I don't think it harkens back to, it's basically what Bob and Ray did in the early days of radio, creating characters. The thing that's amazing about Phil is he's got 5, 6 people going at the same time out of this brain that is split in several different directions. So I don't know as that could do it, but I would like to think that there are a lot of talented people, maybe not even near that good, because to me that's the holy grail of good, that could execute that stuff. Maybe you'd have to go to XM Sirius or something like that. I don't know if AM radio is so far entrenched in the crap they do now that they would even consider trying something different like that. But I would like.
If I may, what you're saying comes again to an issue about demographics. Nobody young, nobody any advertiser wants to advertise to is listening to an AM radio. They might listen to FM, and I'd be surprised by that. What are they doing? Podcast, as you said, Dave. They're listening online. If they're listening to anything that's online, we have so many people doing so much stuff online that everything anybody wants, certainly of a younger, and I don't mean that young, I mean 40s, 30s down, they're getting it on the computer these days. And I think that's another issue that why AM is really on the ropes, and Lord knows where it's going to be 10 years from now.
So if we put all this together then, the fact that there simply is nothing creative on AM radio anymore. There isn't. There really isn't. It is syndicated radio at best because management doesn't want to pay for anything. They're under contract. They take the shows for free, and they make a few bucks off it. And a lot of the syndicated shows are the same drivel over and over again. You can, if you want, you can travel from city to city and state to state and hear the same stuff. I want to say that Dan Patrick, for instance, does a really good show that includes sports. But most of it is the same over and over again. There's nothing local. So having said all that, can all four of us shake our heads and agree that AM radio's dead? I mean, really, there's no reason to worry about it, no reason to talk about it, walk away from it, and just put an RIP stake in its heart once and for all.
I would say I'll make a confession. I still have my ham radio license, and I think ham radio is one of the coolest hobbies that you can have. But like AM radio, I don't think I'm going to be surrounded by a bunch of people that are going to listen to me like typing out Morse code in my garage, So I think.
Yeah, you're really showing your age here, Caprito. Let's stop right there, okay? You're going overboard.
Jeez.
Chris, what do you think? Just put a stake in AM radio. Let's stop talking about it once and for all.
I mean, I hate to be, that negative, but yeah, I think that's the case. I think AM is dead, and I love AM radio. I mean, it's magic to me because of what I grew up around. But yeah, I think you can safely say AM radio, as far as being a viable source of anything creative or exciting, is kaput.
Dave, Corey, and I think those are the key words, exciting or creative. That's the point, because certainly you have people such as the sports talkers and the syndicated news talkers and the right-wing talkers and the left-wing talkers who all make money off it. But when it comes to real creativity and really being fun, DOA?
I think there are some little glimmers of hope because there are a couple of sportscasters in our market that seem to understand that when guys get together to talk sports isn't the only thing they talk about. So you can see them start to drift off into guy talk, which to me is a lot more listenable than continuous sports talk. It's what guys do when they get together. You're sitting around with a bunch of guys drinking beers or whatever. It's not all about statistics and sports, and it takes off on different tangents. So,
well, but I think, I'm gonna mildly disagree with you here on this point, because as a guy who's done sports talk his whole life, all right, I understand what you're talking about, and now you're talking about another facet of the industry, which we could spend an hour or two on, which is guy talk radio, which to me is offensive in many ways, because I
wouldn't listen to it.
Well, we have people in this market in South Florida and in other places who take it too far, and I will tell you about the day that I was flipping the dial and went to AM Talk Radio in South Florida and went to one of the stations which had a local show at the time. I don't even know if they still have it in the afternoons. It was two guys sitting at a convention in Miami Beach, and this was the Rough Trade Sex Convention for sex toys in Miami, and they had a prostitute that they were, and they were flat out, they said that she was a prostitute, and they were talking about boys and girls, men and women's sex toys on the air for, and this is a sports talk station. Hey, look, I'm not a prude by any means. But to me, that's ridiculous. Where are you going with this? Because, and not only that, I'll tell you that a lot of this guy talk radio, it drifts off into absolute screaming nonsense where all they want to do is yell at each other about, well, my wife did this and my kids did that. It's not interesting, Dave. I mean, maybe if you took sports and made it creative with the guy talk, but these people who just blow things off and decide to talk about things, I can't get interested.
Well, this is where management comes in too, and if if you don't have that kind of direction given to you, then that's what it's going to evolve into. And again, it goes back to what I was talking about. If you've got bits, make sure that they have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that's what I hear so many times is this could be really good, but it starts off with this is National Wiener Day or something like that, and then just goes on forever and ever and ever without any kind of punchline. They have little punchlines that might work. They keep trying those, and then they keep going for another 2 minutes and try to find another one. So, yeah, it's like, again, this is theater. And you need somebody, you have a program director, and that is the job of the program director. Say, let's listen to what you did. That was just garbage. You were searching for the elusive punchline, and that's not how it goes.
And you missed
I think that it's laziness too, because they think there's no show prep that's involved. They just come in and do the innuendos and whatever. But with direction, it could work,
But again, what you're talking about is management who gives a damn.
Mm-hmm.
And knows what it's doing.
And knows what it's doing, exactly. You're listening to The Man in the Arena. I'm Ed Berliner. You're hearing the voices of, and seeing the faces, if you're watching on YouTube and on Facebook Live, of Dave Corey, Dave Caprita, and Chris Ingram. Let's then turn to what Dave mentioned here briefly and talk about FM radio, because FM is what people wanted to listen to. It's clean sound. It's beautiful stereo. Crank it up. It's exactly what everybody wanted when they changed over from AM to FM and they started bringing talk radio to AM radio. Well, go to a lot of markets, and I'm looking at a lot of the numbers these days. FM radio is not exactly killing it in a lot of markets either. And in a lot of markets, such as here in South Florida, and in Los Angeles, and in New York, and in other places, it is mostly Hispanic radio and Hispanic talk that is owning the FM airwaves. It is not English language talk anymore, or English language music for that point. So, with regard to FM, if FM's where people want to go, why isn't it killing? Why isn't it killing it? What is FM missing at this point? Dave Caprita, I'll throw it to you first, seeing as you had a tremendous amount of success on Love 94.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. That was, speaking of Love 94, I flash back to, in addition to doing the morning show with Joe Johnson and Keith Allen back in those days, I was given the opportunity to do a jazz show on Sunday mornings, which was crazy for an AC station back in those days. But it was the advent of smooth jazz, which we didn't call it back then. But when I was doing those 4 hours on Sunday mornings, I even had people from other radio stations. I remember going to some event, and a sales manager from Waxy came up to me and said, "We don't even try to compete with you guys on Sunday morning because of the music I was playing." And I remember during those days, no consultants were telling me what to do. Gary Starr, the general manager, was this great guy that said, "Play whatever the hell you want, as long as it's not like John Coltrane or Sun Ra or something." And they gave me complete license. And I used to joke with my friends saying, you know what? This is probably the only time in my radio career at a commercial radio station I'm going to get to play the hell of what I want. And I don't think you would ever find a radio show like that. To this day, I think it's like one of the #1 rated music shows in South Florida radio history. So I think that's what's missing from FM radio, was like going back to the late 60s we were talking about, like in San Francisco and all, where people played whatever the hell they want to. And the only times you can see that now is like college radio. I mean, here in Atlanta, one of my favorite radio stations is WREK. It's the weirdest radio station you've ever heard. 1 minute they're playing like some Japanese pop song from the 1950s, followed by Mississippi Fred McDowell playing a blues song on his slide guitar, followed by a big band song. And to me, that is what I live for, man. And I think that's what people live. That's why younger people, especially, but the entire population, I think, that listens to radio or music, that's why streaming and other venues are doing so well. Or like even Sirius, as commercial as it is, you can tune in different stations like deep tracks and hear crap that you haven't heard in 40 years. And I just think that's what FM radio is missing once again, because they're owned by 4 corporations who are afraid to push the envelope like we used to do in the instances that I gave.
How nice that you mentioned the other C word, which we'll finish out with momentarily in a little bit, corporations versus consultants. Chris, what do you think as far as FM radio is concerned?
Well, I'm reminded of this trip I took when I was living down in South Florida. I was up for a job in Orlando, so I took a drive up across the Panhandle and north. And every time I come into a new market, I was doing it during the morning drive. I got an early start. Every single market, and on 2 or 3 or 4 stations in that market, were doing the exact same talk. They had the exact same liner notes from America's Got Talent. They had the exact same stories from the news that everybody was talking about. It was almost like listening to the same station over and over and over again. We've lost this desire, I think, to be creative. As Dave was just saying, I mean, the creativity has been pushed aside in favor of a format, of a laid out, drawn up format that they will follow, and if they don't rock the boat. They say things, they might talk about their wife over the weekend or, but bottom line, it was the exact same show all the way up the coast. And I think that's what's killing FM. There's just nobody saying, let's do something different from the competition.
But if you had a chance to do something unique and actually create better ratings and do something that people would listen to, why wouldn't you do it?
Well, again, we get back to talking about consultants. We'll talk later, I guess, about the ownership situation. People are scared to death of rocking the boat with their shows. They'll put out what they know or what they think they know, what they're comfortable with, what they're familiar with, because they know what's coming. They're not going to see any curveballs, and they have the jocks and the on-air talent in their hand, grateful to be there, and not want to rock their boat either.
Dave Corey, do you get that feeling too? Because I think what Chris said, the last thing he said, grateful to be there. And I think what happens is, in a lot of radio, whether it's AM or FM, there is more than ever before, there is a fear factor that rolls through a lot of these stations owned by corporations, because it's no more mom and pop stations. You can't sidle up to the owners anymore. There is, and I've talked, you can speak to it, Caprita can speak to it, I'll bet you Chris can speak to it as well. You walk through these stations, you're worried every single day that you're going to get the axe, because they're looking to do it. They're not valuing any real creative talent whatsoever. So there's that fear, and I think it's a very real fear, and that helps destroy what could become a great sound on FM radio as well. You're walking around on eggshells.
I used to do the production at Light FM, and I'd sit looking through the big window at Light, and I used to say to myself, I'm the fortunate one here, because I'm creating commercials and I'm getting respect for them, and I'm sort of having a lot of fun playing the theater of the mind with the commercials. And I look through the window to the on-air people, and their directives are to do 2 or 4 Facebook posts per hour, and then they have to go on to Twitter and do some posts on that. Everything else except doing a show and concentrating on the show. So what do they get? They get that bullshit show prep crap that like Chris was saying, that everybody's looking at, and that's the easy way out. Talking about the reality shows and, just the same drivel over and over and over, because they don't have time. They've been forced now to go off on the social media platforms. And the other thing that bothers me like crazy is the commercial clusters that go on for like 10 and 12 minutes, and every station does them at the top of the hour and the bottom of the hour. So, not only are you getting driven away from your favorite station, but you can't find an alternative because they're all doing the friggin' commercials at the same time, and then again, the fear. So what you got are a bunch of rookies that should be in Des Moines or Secaucus or wherever, that are in the 11th biggest market in the country, pretending to be a radio hosts and thinking that they're there and they are the future Hall of Famers, and it's sad.
And let's be fair to them too, because there's young talent out there that used to be coddled, and we talked about this earlier. Program directors. I can name in South Florida alone 3 people off the top of my head who are the single worst examples of program directors I've ever had the displeasure to come into contact with, because they never talk to their talent. They don't try and make them better. They criticize them constantly. They leave them thinking that they're no good. They basically keep their jobs on an edge, and they keep them on a leash all the time because they're sitting on a leash from corporate, but they do absolutely nothing to make these people be better at their job. There's no leadership. There's no coaching. There's nothing whatsoever. So you do have guys and gals who could be better, but these people don't give a shit. Because as far as they're concerned, and here's something else I think we have to bring into the mix, whether it's the corporates, the program directors, whomever, in radio today, television today, it's the same thing. Newspaper, certainly, but in media. But let's just talk about our business in radio. You're replaceable. At any time. Yes. You screw it up, young man, young lady, I'll go out and find somebody else who'll do it for half the price and who'll be desperate to come in here and do it. I don't remember that happening. When I was going through radio when I was a kid, I remember Chuck Dent, the news director at WIOD in Miami, who, when I screwed up on the air and went on a newscast and basically convicted a guy of murder, who brought me into his office and said, "Well, congratulations, Ed, you just saved the taxpayers a tremendous amount of money by making sure that we can put this guy in jail and we don't have to worry about a damn thing." But he coached me and got me through it. Made me exceptional at my job today. I'll never forget him for what he did. I don't see that happening today.
No, and it's so unfortunate. I speak of the young talent, and I have a big in my heart for them, because they are basically indentured servants. And now it's like, okay, you're going to do your shift. This big corporation just purged and made their talent rosters a lot leaner. So what you're going to do now, for no increase in money, is not only do your show, but you're going to voice track for 5 different markets in the country where we have stations. And that makes me sick. It makes me ill to know that abuse is going on.
And you
it just
up
ain't the way it
tracks,
used to be.
Which I think we can all talk about it for a moment. What many people don't realize is, no longer do you have to have, by FCC guideline, a master control located right where the station is. It can be anywhere. And I remember talking to, and there's a gentleman who I'm hoping is watching this show today, because he went through it in Miami, where he wound up being the voice of 6 different radio stations in 6 different states outside of South Florida. And you're exactly right. He had to voice the headlines, had to write them, had to put them together, and didn't get any extra money for it whatsoever. Because most of these, and I'm guessing, not guessing, but a lot of these jocks do the same thing. They're not located in Kansas City. They're not located in Denver. They're 600 miles away doing this somewhere, and they're doing it on the cheap.
And you have brought up something that I was hoping that we could mention, was when I knew the day the music died was after working different morning shows over my career, and then moving to LA and becoming the starving actor. I came back to South Florida and got a gig at a company called Star Systems. Jody Stewart, Don Agony or Don Anthony worked there. We had a blast working together. But I went from 6 figures doing a morning show, 4 hours a day with a little bit of post show work, to being on 20-something different stations, not 6. We were like some of these people were like doing 20, 25 different radio stations for like about $35,000 a year.
Yeah.
And this was like a scant 2 to 3 years after the Telecommunications Act. So we were on all these radio stations, mostly in the South, but some were like up in Michigan, a couple were out in Texas or whatever. But you would sit there and pump these babies out. And if Thanksgiving was coming up and you wanted to spend Thanksgiving with your family on the Friday or the Thursday before or the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, you sat there for 12, 15 hours pumping out voice tracks for all these radio stations, or you were out. And to me, that was the writing on the wall to me. That was like, this isn't Kansas anymore, Dorothy. So to me, that was the beginning of the end, what you guys are talking about voice tracking. I mean, voice tracking like being in prison.
And speaking of Kansas, there's a perfect example. There was, I think it was Colorado, where they actually had a tornado coming through, but there were no live announcers in the town on any of the stations.
Right.
No local station to cover the fact that we might have a tornado coming that's going to blow your ass away, and that's tragic.
That happened. I just quickly was going to say that one of the radio stations during the Star Systems days was I was a DJ on a station in Huntsville, Alabama. And I finished my raps and everything for the weekend. I went home, drove all the way up to Palm Beach where I was living. Star Systems was down in Plantation. And when I got home, I was hearing all these nightmare stories about ice storms in northern Alabama. And I felt so friggin' guilty. I didn't have to do it, and nobody told me to do it. But I got in my car, drove back, and redid a bunch of my raps to let everybody know that an ice storm was coming. And so what they're saying, I mean, that happened all the time, where and we used to get complaints from people who were fans of local DJs, and people would find out that we were down in Miami and they were up in Florence, Alabama or whatever. We used to get hate mail.
Sure. Well, there is no local radio anymore, and I want to use this as the perfect segue then to the last segment of our Who Killed Radio. You mentioned the Telecommunications Act, which most people in this audience, listening and watching to us, have no idea what we're talking about. Let's remind you, this is February of 1996, where before that time, no one could own more than 2 AM and 2 FM in a single market. Corporate media spent more than $34 million in the campaign during the election cycle to get this passed. The corporate media covered it up because they were told to. It was good for their bosses. Since that deregulation, more than a third of all U.S. radio stations have been bought and sold. And of the almost 5,000 radio stations across almost 300 set radio markets, more than half are now owned by a company owning 3 or more stations in the same market. Gentlemen, we've all been affected by this because this is a monopoly. These are big companies who own 7, 8, 9 stations. South Florida is pretty much 2 or 3 big companies, and that's it. And it not only destroys local radio, but it destroys the ability for local talent to be able to move from place to place. Because you used to be able to go from one radio station to another, and you could change, and you could get new jobs. You can't do that anymore because the stations are owned by the conglomerates. And let's bring this in here while we're here. All 3 of us watch it. We get the emails. We watch the trade publications. The big companies blow people out. It's like we have Dark Fridays, Dark Thursdays, whatever. Well, I get the emails and I see where, because of COVID-19, certainly because of a lot of that going on and because of less revenue, they're blowing people out by the hundreds. But it's not just during the virus. It's at times when stations need to consolidate their cash, make more money, and the stations that have huge debt services that have to make sure we got to cover it up somewhere, and you're sacrificing these people who are outstanding talents because the companies, we own it. Now, let me play devil's advocate. Companies will come back and say, hey, guys, come on, wait a minute. This is America. We're allowed to own as many stations as we want. The government lets us do it, and as a matter of fact, we put up some really good benefits for our employees. If you're listening on podcast, you missed the right wink, the wink and a nod on that one. And they will say, we're actually doing people a service by doing this because we're making jobs more viable and we're helping people find jobs.
Yeah, right.
I'm going to go to Dave Corey. I'm going to go to Dave Corey, the first one on this, because I think Dave's probably the one that, as we're doing the show, is the most recently affected by this. Because after a brilliant career, you got your pink slip just for no reason other than they wanted to.
Well, this is to be fair, it's a unique situation because really in 2017 I retired, but I guess it was a semi-retirement. I was never actually severed from the company. I would go in and do, I would sub for the production guy, brilliant guy, Doug Turkel, when he'd go on vacation. And people would see me in the hallways and they say, "What are you doing here, Dave?" And I said, "Well, over the years, I've been in radio so long, I accrued 48 weeks of vacation, and when you see me here, it's I'm actually doing my job." So, but that until recently, and until just like less than a month ago, I would be able to go in and do some part-time stuff, which was kind of fun for me. I still had a hand in it, and it was production too, which was neat because that's where I said the last bastion of creativity is in radio. But I just recently got released from that corporation, which didn't bother me at all because I hadn't really been doing that much of late anyways. They getting along without me. As a matter of fact, they blew a couple of production guys out and laid it all on one guy for 5 stations. So
well, but think about that. There's one guy for 5 stations, and that's just all part of it. I mean, Chris, certainly you've seen this in your travels as well, and we all as professionals see this. There's nothing we can do. Yet, however, there are the monopolies that are out there, and they're not going to stop. You're not going to have it go back to, again, mom-and-pop ownership because they can't afford it anymore, and these stations aren't going to get rid of it. Now, they may release a few stations, they may get rid of a few here and there, but it's not really going to make a difference, is it?
Well, they're not in the broadcasting business anymore. I'm going to use a 4-letter word here. Debt. Radio owners are in the debt servicing business. They're not in the radio. They're not in the broadcasting business, not in the creativity business or the performing business. They're in servicing the debt business. And until that changes, I don't know how you can, because they're all they're in debt up to their armpits or worse. But with that gets to the bottom of everything we're talking about. Why there's no creativity, why the people are so afraid to nurture talent, why people are afraid to do something new. Because these huge corporations have to pay, the CEO that's $15 million annual paycheck. And that's what it comes down to. I think that's what it boils down to.
Which is another issue in all this, which is the golden parachutes that a lot of these CEOs get while people are getting fired.
Yeah.
Or like with Clear Channel, after Rush Limbaugh was hired and was making $40 million a year, you saw thousands of Clear Channel, like people that were behind the scenes, board ops, producers, runners, were fired, thousands across the country. And I mean, don't get me started, but I think that's a perfect example of what Chris is talking about, where people's priorities get askew, to put it mildly.
We have to consider that.
Until debt do us part. I just said until debt do us part.
Yeah, and they're never going to part. That's part of the issue, because they can't. They have to write it down. When it comes to monopolies, for those of you watching us, for those of you listening to us, we'll make sure that you understand it as well. We currently have, as we're doing this podcast, the National Association of Broadcasters wants to propose that the FCC change the ownership rules so that a single entity, a corporate, can own or control up to 8 commercial FMs in markets 1 to 75 with no cap on AM ownership, so they could own every AM station in the town, in the market, if they wanted to, plus 8 FMs if they're able to find stations that need to release it from the debt and need to get themselves out from underneath it. And a licensee has the ability to own up to 2 more commercial FM stations, up to 10, if they participate in something called an incubator program, which should only incubate good talent, maybe for a change, and maybe young talent, or that it eliminate restrictions on the number of commercial FM or AM stations a single entity, a company, can own in both unrated markets and those outside of the top 75. Gentlemen, this is all over again. This is even worse. This is putting corporates at a position where they can own, you have enough money, you can own the market, which means you own the talent, you own the ability to get a job, you own all the sales, you have a monopoly on that sales for all of the bigger accounts, and you're basically putting people out of work instead of creating jobs. So when we put this all into the mix of who killed radio, do we not put corporate ownership at the very top of all this at the end of the day?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The creepiest part of that. Yeah.
Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, the creepiest part of that is, not to get political, but you then have in no market in this country, if that comes to pass, do you have the ability to express diverse opinions? You're going to have one opinion, and that's it, and you're not going to be able to be fed any opposing opinions. And to me, this is 1984, man. Obviously, we see what's going on, and it's frightening from that point.
What Dave Corey is bringing up here is something that very few people discuss here, gentlemen, is the fact that if you own all the stations, you then program them with the local and the syndicated programming that you want, which means you are basically the only voice that an entire community hears. And there was a time when the FCC had something called the Fairness Doctrine, which disappeared a long time ago, which goes all the way back to 1987, when Ronald Reagan talked about the fact that in any other medium besides broadcasting, such federal policing of the editorial judgment of journalists would be unthinkable, in basically vetoing the legislation that turned or would have turned into law the Fairness Doctrine. The doctrine meant, according to the FCC, that all the radio and TV stations had to, and I quote again, afford reasonable opportunity for the discussion of conflicting views on issues of public importance. Mm-hmm. I think Dave's right. I think we've hit 1984, and I don't think there's any way back.
I got 2 words for you. Post 9/11, Dixie Chicks, where an entire, across the country, their music, whether you agreed with them or not, their music disappeared from most commercial radio stations, which were owned by you-know-who.
Look at Caprina trying to hide.
What you were saying, Ed, about the incompetence of a lot of PDs, I think what we're talking about the Telecommunications Act and corporations being able to own multi-radio stations, a perfect example to me, which was really infuriating, was Love 94 was an independent radio station when I worked there. After I left, of course, I had a lot of friends who still worked there. And when the Telecommunications Act went into effect, they were conglomerated into the same building with radio stations like Zeta. Now, I won't mention any names, but the PD who was doing Zeta at that time, I think it was like a AA format, and he just, for legitimate reasons, loved Zeta. It was his baby. So he put 100% of his energy into programming that radio station. Lo and behold, to save money, they got rid of the PD for Love 94, and he became the PD for Love 94. I used to speak to my friends on the sly that still worked at the radio station, and they would tell me, Dave, it's been 1.5 years since we had a staff meeting. He never tells us what to do. He never like has any concerns about how the DJ sound and everything. And it was because, I mean, this is a conspiracy theory, but I think it's true. He Zeta was his station. He didn't give a shit about Love 94, and he was not going to give them advice on how to improve their ratings if it was going to affect his other radio station. So you've got like this conflict of interest thing going on when these corporations take over, and you have one PD that is like a ruling over all 4 or 8 radio stations.
And even if they're trying to do the good fight, what you end up having, if you got somebody who's really trying to do his best for all the stations, how can you stretch a PD? How far and wide can you stretch a man or a woman to actually do justice to a format on 8, 5, 6, 12 stations? It's impossible. And that again leads to that erosion of quality we're talking about.
But if
I can only compare
but if you have
the theater
PDs like that, and if you have PDs who will, in essence, automate a station in many ways, which means it has this pack of music to play and these liner notes and everything is taken care of. I mean, they've done it before. I know exactly the PD whom Dave Caprita is talking about, and I ran afoul of him many times. But he was a coward. He was little talented, if at any, in what he did for a position. Had to rely on others to basically prop him up. He was trying desperately to constantly promote his position as being irreplaceable, and everything suffered because of it. But ownership and the guy sitting in the general manager's chair allowed it to happen.
And so it goes.
Well, I remember the days, speaking of how, and I think Chris touched on that. Well, all of you guys have, but I've crossed this country many times for radio gigs or just because of bipolar manic behavior.
Thanks for admitting that, Dave.
Driving from Miami to Seattle, Miami to LA. And one of the joys, back in the 80s or the 70s or whatever, was crossing this country, and like you would turn on especially AM, but you would turn on AM, FM, and every time you got into a different region, Texas, New Mexico, or Colorado, you would listen to the flavor of the different regions of this wonderful country. Absolutely. And then I remember when we moved to LA in 2000, and this was like after all the stuff we're talking about happened, and it was like what you were saying, you would go from one FM radio station to another and they were playing the exact same music, and it was like, what happened to the personality of this city or this area that I'm driving through?
It was AM skip. I remember living in South Florida, and you'd wait until you had a cloud cover, because a cloud cover always meant that the signals were bouncing like this instead of like this. And I'd be sitting there tuning the radio, 77 WABC, and you could just, if you cranked it just a little, if you got it just at the right spot, you were able to get it. And I was also able to get 880 WCBS AM, the news station, and it felt like home. But you could do that. But you can't really do it anymore because much of the power has changed. That was the days of the 50,000-watt boomers, and you could hear them up and down the coast.
Oh man, yeah,
WVA.
That was, and to Chris, speaking of WABC and all, being this little snotty-nosed kid in Pensacola, my dad was in the Navy, so I lived there growing up, and 50,000 watts, listening to Whoa out of Fort Wayne, Indiana, to Allison Steele, and KAAY in Little Rock, Arkansas. And I remember when the sun went down, if like the ionosphere was right, you could tune in WABC, and I would listen to those guys down in the friggin' Florida Panhandle.
Yeah,
well, that was cousin Brucey at night from 6 to 10. And
absolutely.
I'm trying to think of who did the 10 to midnight. I can't remember who did the 10 to midnight, because that was the time you'd get it too. Chuck Leonard.
Chuck Leonard was there.
Yes.
Chuck Leonard.
WABC you're talking about?
Yep.
Chuck, yeah.
Chuck Leonard.
Best whoever did and got away with it.
God.
I interviewed Joe Piscopo for my book, and he talked about being in college in Florida listening on midwinter days, listening to my father and in his college dorm. And that's kind of led up to his going up and meeting my dad at the radio station, and they had a bit of a friendship. I mean, it's amazing what they got letters from what's the farthest they got? I think they got letters thousands of miles away. They got, you send in a little letter and you get a card saying, yes, you actually heard us. They got it from all over the country, if not the world. Back in that day, you sit back with your radio at night.
By the way, I do want to point out that if anybody wants to read some of these stories, in case you're wondering, I just happen to have this handy. This was the book written by Chris Ingram called Hey Kimosabe, The Days and Nights of a Radio Idol, IDYLL, very nicely done. Is the book still in print?
Oh yeah, you can get it anywhere. Mostly online. You have to go to Barnes and Noble or Amazon, whatever. But it's still available. Still, in fact, I don't know if I'm really allowed to say this, but I'm in negotiations right now to sell the option, and we have some producers who are interested in possibly, and again, it's possibly, long way off, not getting my hopes up, working into a TV series.
That would be not great. Allowed to say it. You really can't. It's illegal, and I told you couldn't do that. So you're all in trouble now. Well,
can I say something to Chris at this point, real fast? Okay, all right.
Yeah, go ahead, Corey.
No, it's a personal thing. When I was with AFTRA, the American Federation of Television Radio Artists, as a national officer, a vice president of AFTRA, your dad was as well. And I remember a particular convention where we had to make nominating speeches for the candidates that were running for office, and they were always supposed to be funny. And I did my 5-minute bit for one of the candidates, and I came down, and Dan was standing there, and he just looked at me and he says, "Good set, man," like that. And it was like the greatest day of my life. And we became very fast friends. We would actually run meetings in New York together and stuff like that. And I just loved him dearly. He was genuine and a nutty guy. And Maureen, his wife, just two really special people. So I just wanted to let you know the impact that man. Yeah.
I told Chris before the show that the one thing that I will always be upset about it's that I didn't get to do. I never got a chance to interview your dad. I so wanted to do it, and I never got the chance. I didn't know he lived in Fort Lauderdale. If I had, I would have beat my feet over to his house, apartment, whatever. I would have sat on his door with a tape recorder and said, "Talk to me. Just tell me stories." That's all. That would have been the best thing. But we still have some of the best things to listen to, and I still get a lot of Dan Ingram stuff, and I have some stuff actually on cassette sitting there. I save everything, for crying out loud. Okay, before we get out of here, because we have gone way too long, and I really don't care because this has been one of the most fun shows that I have ever done. To all three of you then, the radio, station, show, DJ, whatever, that made the greatest impact on you and that you had the most fun listening to, period, end of story. Chris, you cannot say your dad. You have to come up with somebody else, which is why I'm going to start with you first.
There's somebody else?
Somebody else.
I didn't know there was somebody else. I'm just kidding.
Harry Harrison and Ron Lundy would not like to hear that. Was there anybody?
Well, I mean, I loved them all. There was something about Chuck Leonard to me, though, that was just so... I grew up listening to my dad, and he was really funny and sharp and quick and fast and doing all the multi-layering of the jingles and the music and the commercials even. And that was great. That was kind of this barely controlled madness, But to me, Chuck Leonard was like erudite. He was cool. He was somebody you'd listen to, and he had that secret my dad always talks about, contact. It felt like he was talking to me, And I think he's the one, apart from obviously my dad, that when I listened to him, I thought I was really listening to somebody special, somebody with just a sense of class and style that I never heard anywhere else.
He was perfect at night. He was absolutely perfect night guy. His voice was perfect, and everything he did was awesome. And that was a great thing about ABC. Harry Harrison, frenetic in the morning. Your dad from 10 to 2, who had the madness. Cousin, hang on, Ron. No, hang on. Wait. Harry Harrison, 6 to 10. Ron Lundy from 10 to 2. And Lundy was the friendly guy. And then your dad came on and drove drive time in the afternoon with his madness. And then Cousin Brucey came on, high energy, from 6 to 10. And then Leonard came out and just kind of put it all to bed. It was just the greatest radio lineup ever in history. Dave Caprita, go for it.
Well, absolutely number one, but I actually have one and then a B. Neil. And strangely enough, I listened to him for years on AM radio before I met him. And I always heard that, and my theory was that he got his talents and ability, and he even told me this at one time, that his ability to bounce that basketball for 4 hours without hesitation was when his history getting into radio and being a baseball announcer. Because like during those dead spots, you have to fill it with like statistics, with like personality, with jokes. And I think that's where he got his talent from that he brought to South Florida, was in upstate New York. He used to do college baseball all the time. So I used to listen to him and his ability to start when he was doing politics, which I would love to hear him in this day and age. He would start it off like really low, almost like, he would laugh at this, almost like Hitler, where he would start like really low and like build up to a crescendo. And then after 15 minutes of you going, oh my God, he would go, okay, we're going to take a break and then we're going to take phone calls. And he brought that to WINZ when he said, you know what, screw it with the politics. I'm not going to change the world. And he started doing like the goofy bit stuff and the comedy and all, and just being his gay Jewish self on South Florida radio. And then, so the opportunity when he came to FM on Zeta, and they asked if I would run the board for him. And he was like, give Caprita a mic. It was like, I think I always joke with people that I think my epitaph on my tombstone is going to be Captain Dave, because that was the name that he gave me when we started doing the show together. So Neil, and like what I was saying earlier, how he poo-pooed consultants, how he would rip the shit out of management.
No, he didn't poo-poo consultants. He hated him. He crapped all over him. Come on.
Yeah.
Consultants and salespeople, he crapped all over him every single day.
I can't tell you how many times Pete Bolger used to storm into the studio while he was on the air.
Program
and
director.
like say, stop it. And Neil, and like the listeners loved it. And so he's the guy, not just somebody that I listen to.
So he's one. Who's 1B or 1A?
1B would be when I had the fortune of working on Coast to Coast AM on Premier Radio when I was a board op at Premier Radio. And I got to work on weekends with Art Bell. And people hated working with him because he had a temper, and if something went wrong, he would throw a temper tantrum and all. But he and I wouldn't say that I was a close friend of his, but we had a relationship, and I must say that he was one of the best listeners of anybody that I ever worked with. And to me, like everybody from Charlie Rose, well, Art Bell is even better than him. So before he passed away, the years that I worked with Art Bell, after listening to him for, once again, I was a fan of his for over a decade before I got to work with him. And he was a pro. He was a major pro, and I always cherish the hours that I spent with him before he passed away.
You know what that's like about tough people to work with, because I think I was the only person in the world who got along with Rick Weaver, the voice of the Miami Dolphins, and Rick loved me. And I think I was the only. Well, that's only because I always got Ricky's martinis in time before I went down to the opposing locker room. But that's another story for another day. Dave Corey.
Yeah, I'd say AM West Coast, a guy I used to listen to when I was going to junior high school in Sunnyvale, California. He was in San Francisco, KSFO. His name was Don Sherwood. He just was a real lush. I didn't know what that was all about at the time. But he would have this guy that would come on and do soccer scores, and he had an accent like this. And at the end of the show, he'd go, and remember this, it's not the honest on the lost, it's the view of something on the highway. And I go, what did he say? And it's not the harness on the horse that hurts. It's the heavy hooves on the hard highway, So then we go to Northeast AM radio, Northeast, Dale Dorman. I used to love him on WRKO, of course, Dan Ingram. Then we come down here, and it's got to be Neil. FM down here, simply because I enjoyed the relationship being in the production studio and having Kimba come in and say, here's a bit I want to do. I want to do it in like 20 minutes. Here's a quick script. And we would produce it, and bang, it would be on the air in 20 minutes. And it was some of the funnest stuff that I've ever had to do. And then some of the radio dramas that I would write, like for Halloween, that won international awards, like a whole takeoff on Dracula, a brand new Dracula story. She played the great granddaughter of Van Helsing, and she was a police sergeant, and it was just really a great relationship. And again, she had a talent and acuity for being able to mine deep for jokes that nobody else would go for. So that's pretty much it.
Gentlemen, we may.
Oh, and then there's you, Ed.
No, yeah. Not even close, big guy. I did my sports and my news and had a great time and did the sportscasting in South Florida for a lot of years, but then I left and worked for television networks, and I got to tell you, there are times I wish I'd have stayed in South Florida, to be honest. There are some times where some of those trips and some of those places I worked, which one of these days I'll put it in the book. I keep threatening to do that damn book, but I always know I can't write it because, holy crap, the lawyers would be busy for 20 years. For me, I have to pay somebody to get through this damn thing with all the lawyers. It would kill me. But, gentlemen,
and I'm not blowing smoke up your dress, but your sportscasts on Channel 7 were perfect. They were some of the best. They were fast. The ones you just do real quick like that. You're a genius, and I am thrilled to have been with you here today.
7 was fun. 6 was fun. I'll tell you where I had my most fun was on a show called Sports Pulse on the CN8 network in Boston. I did that for 3.5 years, and I like to tell people that I got there in 2003. The Red Sox won the World Series in 2004 and broke the curse. Without me, they would still suck. So I will take full responsibility and full credit for that, but that was all.
Yes.
Guys, I want to thank you all for being here. I mean, this has been fun rolling down and talking, because this is a conversation that I'm going to archive and get out there that I want people to listen to, because it constantly comes up. There's always talk about what killed radio. I think we've answered all the questions here pretty much, and now, unfortunately, we have to go to satellite. But hell, if it pays, we'll all go to satellite.
Yeah.
What the hell?
There you go.
Chris, thank you so much again. I want to thank you. It's been a pleasure to meet you. Chris and I had not met before we did this show. I hope we do this many more times again. And trust me when I tell you, I will always think fondly about your dad. Dave Caprita on Love 94. Remember your time there. Certainly, it was awesome to have you here. Dave and I I don't think we've talked except for passing each other in a hallway maybe 20 years ago. It's been that long. And Dave Corey, an exceptional actor. I mean, the things that he has been in, the voices that he has created that constantly kept everybody laughing, and his work in the production studio is unequaled by anybody I have ever seen work on commercials and do voices. You are indeed, and this again, I'm not blowing smoke up your skirt, you are one of the best, and you are all three excellent at what you do, and I want to thank you all for joining us. Be safe. Stay healthy. Let's talk again soon, all right? Thank you so much, guys. I appreciate this time.
That's fine. Thank you.
Love you guys. Love you a lot.
3 outstanding guys who join us here on the show. Hey, a reminder once again, don't forget that you can catch us on Facebook Live. Also, don't forget, the show is also seen on YouTube once it's all over, and we are also on all of the major oddcast? I made up a brand new word. All of the major audio podcast platforms. And for those of you listening on podcast, you'll hear about that here momentarily. Also, for those of you watching, you'll see it here as well. Again, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Dave. And thank you, Dave. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thanks for being a part of this. I'm Ed Berliner. This is The Man in the Arena. And until next time, rock on, true believers. For story ideas, comments, start some interesting debates, or just get in touch, join me on social media at Berliner Speaks on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Also join me on LinkedIn for business and also sponsorship discussions. There you can search out Ed Berliner. A reminder that all of our episodes on Man in the Arena are available on YouTube. Just go to welcometothearena.com. Every episode of Man in the Arena is also available on audio podcast on all of the major platforms. This has been a presentation of Entourage Management, LLC, and Entourage Media.